Imagine you're watching a high-stakes game of poker. One player is sitting on a mountain of chips. His hand is hidden, and he's just raised the stakes to a level that makes everyone else in the room sweat. He hasn't flipped his cards yet. He hasn't won the pot officially. But here's the thing. Everyone at the table already knows exactly what he's holding. They can see the confidence in his eyes, the way he's controlled the flow of the game for years. In that moment, he doesn't need to show his hand to own the room. He is already the most powerful person there. This is exactly where Iran stands today. For decades, the world has been obsessed with one question: when will Iran test a nuclear bomb? We wait for the desert tremor, the seismic reading, the official announcement that would signal their entry into the nuclear club. But what if I told you that in 2026, the test is actually the least important part of the equation? What if I told you that Iran is already 99% ready, and that final 1%, the actual explosion, is just a formality they might never even need? To understand why, you have to look past the headlines of airstrikes and sanctions. You have to look at the threshold. Most people think of a nuclear power like a light switch. It's either off or it's on. You either have the bomb or you don't. But in the world of high-level geopolitics, it's more like a dimmer switch. Iran has been slowly turning that dial up for years, moving from a state with a program to a threshold state. Think about it like this. If you have all the ingredients for a gourmet meal, a professional kitchen, and a world-class chef standing by, do you really need to take a bite to prove you can cook? Of course not. The capability itself is the message. By reaching a point where they can enrich uranium to 60% and technically 90% within just a matter of days or weeks, Iran has achieved something called nuclear hedging. They have the know-how that can't be bombed away, the materials hidden in fortified mountains like Fordow that are nearly impossible to reach, and the missile technology to deliver a payload if they chose to. In the eyes of their rivals, the difference between can build a bomb in a week and already has one is practically zero. The shadow of the bomb is just as heavy as the bomb itself. They've reached a point where they get the deterrent benefits of a nuclear weapon without the massive international backlash that comes with a physical test. They aren't waiting for a test to be a power. They are already a power because the world has to treat them like one. The 99% isn't a failure to finish the job. It's a calculated, strategic choice to stay right. On the edge, I've realized that the real power doesn't come from the explosion itself. It comes from the silence that precedes it. In the intelligence world, we call this strategic ambiguity, and Iran has turned it into an art form. Every time a Western diplomat sits across from an Iranian official, they aren't just negotiating with a country, they are negotiating with a ticking clock. See, if Iran actually conducted a physical nuclear test, the mystery would be over. The world would have a clear, undeniable reason to launch a full-scale intervention or impose total isolation. But by staying at 99%, they keep the world in a state of perpetual hesitation. It's a psychological deadlock. Take the Fordow enrichment plant as an example. It's buried so deep under a mountain of solid rock that even the most powerful bunker buster bombs struggle to reach it. When I look at the satellite imagery and the data coming out of these sites, I don't see a country struggling to cross the finish line. I see a country that has intentionally built a fortress around its capability. They have mastered the fuel cycle. They have the centrifuges spinning at record speeds, and they have the ballistic delivery systems ready. In the past, the red line for the international community was the creation of a weapon. But Iran has moved that red line. They've forced us to realize that the weapon isn't just the warhead, it's the infrastructure, the scientists, and the thousands of kilograms of enriched uranium already sitting in their stockpiles. If they were to take that final 1% leap tomorrow, it wouldn't change their military posture as much as you'd think. Their missiles can already reach any corner of the Middle East, and their influence stretches through every proxy conflict in the region. They've realized that as long as they can build it, their enemies have to think twice before every move. It's the ultimate insurance policy, and they've secured it without ever having to strike a match. They are playing a game where the goal isn't to win the war, but to make sure the war is too expensive for anyone else to start. What's even more chilling is how the global landscape has shifted in their favor. In the old world, a country trying to go nuclear was a pariah, totally isolated and alone. But look at the map today. We are seeing a new axis of technology forming. Iran isn't just working in a vacuum anymore. They are exchanging drone tech, satellite data, and sophisticated military hardware with superpowers like Russia and China. This partnership has changed the math entirely. When Russia needs thousands of Shahed drones for its own fronts, it creates a shield of protection for Tehran. Suddenly, the threat of crippling sanctions doesn't carry the same weight it did a decade ago. Iran has found a way to bypass the Western financial system, selling its oil and its expertise to partners who are more than happy to look the other way regarding their nuclear status. I often think about the breakout time, that specific window of time it would take to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a single bomb. A few years ago, that window was months, maybe even a year. Today, experts are talking about weeks or even days. But here is the secret that transformed the very definition of a nuclear power. It's no longer about the mushroom cloud. It's about the shadow. They have successfully decoupled the weapon from the test, proving to every other middle market power that you don't need a seat at the official table to control the room. When I analyze their current position, I see a nation that has calculated the cost of that final 1% and realized it's simply too expensive compared to the benefits of staying right where they are. If they cross the line, they lose their leverage. If they stay here, they keep the world guessing, they keep their rivals paralyzed, and they keep their sovereignty intact. They are living in the nuclear twilight, a space where they possess all the threat of a nuclear state with none of the immediate consequences. The reality we have to face in 2026 is that the nuclear club has a new unlisted member. They didn't break down the door, they just built their house so close to the entrance that the distinction no longer matters. The test isn't coming because the test has already happened in the minds of every world leader. The 99% isn't a work in progress, it's the finished product. And as long as that clock stays, at 1 minute to midnight, Iran holds exactly the kind of power they've been seeking for 40 years. They aren't waiting for the future. They've already arrived. This leads us to the ultimate question: what happens next? Most people are waiting for a bang, but the real shift is happening in the silence. By occupying this 99% space, Iran has effectively rewritten the rules of modern warfare. They've created a deterrence trap. If an adversary strikes their facilities now, they risk triggering the very thing they're trying to prevent, forcing Iran to use that final 1% out of necessity. But if they don't strike, they have to accept a world where Iran dictates the terms of the Middle East. It is a masterpiece of strategic patience. They've watched other nations like North Korea endure decades of crushing isolation after their tests, and they've chosen a different path, the path of the invisible nuke. I see a future where the traditional nuclear club becomes a relic of the past. Iran's model is a blueprint for the next generation of regional powers. It's about building the car, keeping the keys in the ignition, and letting the engine idle. You don't need to drive it into a wall to prove it works. The sound of the engine is enough to make people clear the road. As we look at the horizon of 2026 and beyond, we have to stop asking if they will become a nuclear power. We have to start asking how we live in a world where they already are. The 99% isn't a gap, it's a bridge, and Iran has already crossed it. The world spent 40 years trying to stop a countdown, only to realize the clock was never meant to hit zero. It was meant to stay right here in this high-tension 99% reality, where the threat is more useful than the weapon itself. They are ready, they are powerful, and they didn't need a single test to prove it. The most fascinating part of this strategy is how it changes the behavior of everyone else around them. In the past, the goal of international intelligence was to prevent the bomb. But how do you prevent something that already exists in every way except for a physical shell? You can't unlearn physics, and you can't bomb 1,000 scattered hard drives and the collective memory of an entire generation of scientists. I look at the region now, and the shift is undeniable. Neighbors who were once vocal critics are now seeking diplomatic openings. Rivals who talked about all options on the table are now moving with extreme caution. This isn't because they've softened their stance. It's because the cost of miscalculation has become infinite. When you are 99% ready, you are essentially holding a dead man's switch. Any attempt to dismantle the program by force could be the very trigger that pushes them to complete the final 1% in a matter of days. This is the genius of their silent deterrence. They've managed to gain the protection of a nuclear umbrella without having to deal with the international legal fallout of officially leaving the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They get the respect, the fear, and the seat at the table, all while maintaining a thin veil of civilian intent. We are entering an era where the old maps of power are being redrawn. It's no longer about who has the biggest stockpile. It's about who can get to the finish line the fastest if they need to. Iran hasn't just built a program. They've built a permanent state of readiness that forces the world to treat them as an untouchable entity. As I watch the latest developments unfold, I realize the test we were all waiting for wasn't a physical explosion in the desert. The real test was one of will, and by reaching 99% and stopping exactly there, they've already passed it. They have achieved the ultimate goal of any regime: survival through absolute leverage. The world didn't change because of a bomb. It changed because the bomb became a certainty that no longer requires proof. Finally, we have to look at what this means for the global balance of power. By staying at 99%, Iran has effectively ended the era of counter-proliferation. For years, the West used a specific playbook: sanctions, sabotage, and the threat of preemptive strikes. But that playbook only works if the target is still far from the goal. Now that they are sitting on the threshold, the old tactics are obsolete. You can't threaten to stop a train that has already arrived at the station. I see this as the ultimate chess move. They have created a nuclear latency that serves as a permanent shield. If a conflict breaks out in the region involving their interests, the mere existence of that 99% capability acts as a ceiling on how far their enemies can escalate. It's like having a superpower on speed dial. They don't need to call for help. Everyone already knows they have the number. In the end, the world is looking for a signature, a seismic spike on a monitor, or a flash in a satellite image. But I'm looking at the reality of the ground. I see a nation that has integrated nuclear science into its national identity and its military doctrine so deeply that the physical bomb is almost redundant. They have weaponized the potential itself. So, as the headlines continue to speculate on when the big day will come, remember this: the most powerful weapon isn't the one you use. It's the one you make everyone believe you can use at a moment's sum. Notice, Iran isn't 99% of the way to becoming a power. They are 100% a power that has strategically chosen to stay 1% away from a test. The world didn't wake up to a new nuclear reality. We've been living in it for a long time. They've already won the game of shadows, and they did it without ever firing a single shot or detonating a single gram of plutonium. The silence is their victory. The true impact of this 99% status is how it has permanently shifted the psychology of global diplomacy. In my years of tracking these developments, I've seen countless red lines drawn in the sand, only to be washed away by the tide of Iranian persistence. Every time we thought they were cornered, they used that very pressure to justify their next leap forward. Now they've reached a height where the view is completely different. They aren't looking for a way out anymore. They're looking down at a world that has run out of moves. Think about the message this sends to the rest of the world. It's a masterclass in how to challenge a superpower without providing a smoking gun. If they had tested a bomb years ago, they might have faced the same fate as Iraq or Libya. Instead, they took the slow road, the scientific road, the invisible road. They understood that in the modern age, information and ready-to-use capability are just as terrifying as hardware. I believe we are witnessing the birth of a virtual nuclear state. Their strength doesn't come from a stockpile of warheads gathering dust in a silo. It comes from the thousands of centrifuges humming in unison, the scientists who have the blueprints memorized, and the fact that their rivals have to wake up every single morning and ask themselves, is today the day they decide to finish the final 1%? That uncertainty is their greatest asset. It's a psychological weight that sits on every decision made in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh. By not testing, they haven't failed. They have succeeded in creating a perpetual state of almost. They've turned a technical threshold into a permanent geopolitical fortress. As I look at the state of the world in 2026, it's clear that the old definitions of nuclear power are dead. You don't need a blast to prove you're a giant when everyone can already feel your footsteps. Iran has proven that being 99% ready is the most powerful position a nation can hold. It gives you all the protection of the bomb with none of the excuses for your enemies to drop one on you. The game has changed, and while the world was waiting for a bang, Iran was busy winning the silence. This leads to a realization that is perhaps the most uncomfortable for the global community to swallow. We are now living in the era of the invisible empire. By holding steady at that 99% mark, Iran has successfully bypassed the traditional consequences of the nuclear age. They've managed to create a brand of deterrence that is immune to conventional warfare. When I look at the tactical map of the Middle East today, I see a landscape where every move is calculated through the lens of this Iranian capability. It's no longer about whether a specific proxy group is being funded or a certain shipping lane is under threat. Those are just the surface level tremors. The real bedrock of their influence is the nuclear ghost they've created. Adversaries who once spoke of dismantling the regime have been forced to pivot to containment. Why? Because you can't dismantle a regime that has its finger on a trigger that is 99% pulled. The risk of a breakout has become the ultimate diplomatic shield. It's a paradox. By stopping just short of the finish line, they have made themselves more secure than if they had actually crossed it. I've spent years analyzing the rhetoric and the science, and the conclusion is always the same. Iran has achieved a mental victory. They've convinced the world that the bomb is a reality, regardless of whether a physical device exists. This is the new standard of power in 2026. It's not about the iron, it's about the intent. It's about the fact that they have the materials, the missiles, and the motivation all lined up like a loaded gun. The test isn't missing. The test is the world's reaction to their proximity. And as we see nations across the globe adjusting their foreign policies and recalibrating their alliances, it's obvious that Iran has passed that test with flying colors. They've proven that in a world of high-tech surveillance and instant communication, the most effective weapon is the one you never have to show because everyone already knows it's there. They are the masters of the near miss, and in the world of high-stakes survival, near miss is as good as a direct hit. What truly keeps me up at night isn't the thought of a hidden silo or a secret bunker. It's the realization that the world has already accepted this new reality. We've entered the age of post-test deterrence. In the past, the international community had a clear response to nuclear proliferation. If you test, you are cut off from the world. But how do you punish a country for a test they haven't conducted, even when you know they have the capacity to do it by next Tuesday? I see this playing out in every diplomatic corridor. The tension is no longer about stopping Iran from getting the bomb. It's about managing the fact that they are already a threshold power. This 99% status has given them a unique nuclear immunity. They can influence regional politics, support their allies, and push the boundaries of conventional conflict, all while knowing that their threshold status acts as a safety net. No one wants to push them into that final 1% because the consequences of a fully nuclear-armed Iran are too high to gamble with. I've watched the shift in how we analyze their technological milestones. We used to look for signs of a warhead design. Now we look at their space program and their satellite launches. Why? Because the rocket that puts a satellite into orbit is the same technology that carries a nuclear payload across continents. They are demonstrating their power in broad daylight, masked as civilian progress. It's a brilliant camouflage. In this 2026 landscape, the bomb has become a digital and scientific reality rather than a physical one. It's stored in the enriched uranium hexafluoride, in the sophisticated software of the centrifuges, and in the minds of their engineers. They have built a virtual arsenal that is just as effective as a physical one, but far harder to target. They've proven that in the 21st century, the threat of action is often more versatile and more durable than the action itself. They aren't just 99% ready. They are 100% prepared to stay exactly where they are, wielding the most sophisticated form of power the modern world has ever seen. So, where does this leave us? We've been staring at the clock, waiting for the hands to hit midnight, while Iran has been busy rewriting the very concept of time. We're looking for a crater in the desert, but the explosion has already happened, not in the physical world, but in the halls of power, in the calculations of every military general, and in the fundamental structure of global security. I look at the horizon now, and I don't see a nation waiting to join the nuclear club. I see a nation that has built its own club with its own rules. They've successfully turned the threshold into a permanent throne. The final 1% isn't a missing piece. It's the ultimate psychological weapon. It's the bullet that stays in the chamber, making the gun far more terrifying than a spent shell on the floor. The world used to fear the day Iran became a nuclear power. What we failed to realize is that the day has already passed. We are living in the aftermath of a revolution that didn't need a single blast to succeed. They've achieved the impossible: absolute deterrence without a single signature on a nuclear test report. As the sun sets on the old era of clear-cut red lines and predictable treaties, we are left in the nuclear twilight. It's a cold, uncertain place where the threat is invisible, but the weight is crushing. The countdown is over, but the clock didn't end with a bang. It ended with a chilling, echoing silence, a silence that tells the world everything it needs to know. Iran didn't need to test the bomb to prove they had it. They just needed to make sure we were too afraid to find out. The game is over. The board has been flipped. And while we were all waiting for the smoke to clear, the shadow of the 99% has already covered the world. They aren't coming for the crown. They've been wearing it this whole time.